thank you to the panelists. I've never been on a panel where people have been so concise and getting across such powerful points. I just want to make a very few brief points because we want to get on to questions. First, on the threat, we're at 1.2 degrees of climate change right now, and many people believe we should not go above 1.5. So the next decade is very important. And I think the early impacts are going to be around food security, heat stress, and also migration, which will become a big political issue, I think, in the next 20 years. And as your panelists have said, this is very much linked to social and economic inequalities, employment. So we're on a knife edge, and the next decade is absolutely vital, and we need children to have a voice. So on that second point of voice, Lelia emphasized the value of talking, and also that adolescents have been hugely neglected. When I was at WHO, I used to get really tired of going to meeting after meeting where people said, oh, adolescents are so important, but no one was investing in them. No one was investing in their opportunity. I've spent a lifetime doing research on women's groups and men's groups in poorer countries in Asia and Africa. And they're enormously valuable. We've shown it through big trials that they can reduce mortality rates, improve nutrition, all kinds of impacts, actually reduce things like diabetes and the like. Alexiane said, do you have a mentor? And that's absolutely important. So if you get people together in small groups with a mentor, you can touch on some of the abstract thoughts that she was saying happens after about 12 or 13. And also in small groups of younger children, their sensitivity to nature. Taryn talked about indigenous people, and my experience of working with indigenous people in India taught me that they have so much to teach me about how to live a sustainable life. And I think the importance of casting off shame and stigma that she talked about is relevant to everybody in France, in my country, about post-colonial vulnerable groups. On Friday, I was on a podcast with a Black comedian who's an anti-vaxxer. And we had a fantastic discussion, and it came out that really a lot of the reasons that Black and minority ethnic groups were a bit anti-vaccination was why trust institutions that have abused, discriminated, and been racist in the past. And so this is all part of the healing process. And as Francois said, we must understand our history of exploitation, particularly by men, by the wealthy, and by political elites. Third point is on protection through regulation. We do face enormous commercial exploitation, not just tobacco, alcohol, but also junk food, formula milks, gambling, as you said, Sarah, theft of children's data by social media companies, which I think is an enormous issue, actually. And we must remember we're up against very vested capital and corporate interests, and that we need to be very strategic. I think we can target privacy rights for children and also anti-monopolies. But one thing we must remember is we must be strategic, we must be persistent, and we must be brave. Finally, I would like to emphasize optimism. Almaz started us off. She said she is hopeful. And I agree with that. Things, I've been in this game for a long time. So I think things are much better in many ways than 30 years ago for young people and generally. I don't think we should despair. Yes, we face tipping points in the climate, but there are bad and good ones. I think we're on the cusp of a renewable tipping point, which renewables are now cheaper than most fossil fuels. On population growth, I think we'll plateau by mid-century. Education and communications are much, much better. Sarah will be pleased about the change in US leadership, which now gives us hope to have a much more coordinated global approach to climate change. And finally, health in all policies. That means that all of us have a role in health. It's not just about doctors and nurses. It's in every single sector. So whatever you go on to do in your career, you can have an impact on health and well-being of children. So I'll just leave you with one thought. It's a message I always quote, which is a phrase from Dr. B.K. Ambedkar, who was a very low caste lawyer who rose up to write the Indian constitution in the late 1940s. And he just used a 3-word phrase. He said to all his people, the low caste, downtrodden people of India, he said, educate, agitate, mobilize. And I got the message from all of our speakers today that young people can be brilliant at doing those 3 things: educate, agitate, mobilize. I think business can be both our opponents, but also our allies. I mean, businesses drive the world economy and create employment, etc. I'll give you 2 examples. One is, you know, I'm a pediatrician, child health doctor, and take Nestle. So they're a big Swiss company, and I've been opposed to many of the formula milk companies because they break the WHO code on promotion of breast milk substitutes like formula milks. And I was asked to chair a panel with the Nestle chief executive at a sustainable food forum. And I was in 2 minds, but I agreed to do it. And I met him. And in the public, I said, look, I've been wholly opposed. But we were talking about sustainability. And actually, Nestle, on the scores that are now given to all companies, are actually very progressive when it comes to zero carbon. And in public, I got him to state, and he said, we will be zero carbon by 2030. They take a much longer term view of their business. The other example is insurance and banks have been getting this for a long time. Some of the best reports on climate change have come out of the big banks over the last 2 decades. And again, I met once at a meeting with the chief executive of quite a big insurance company called Aviva, and he was into sustainability. And one of the problems we discussed was the short-term view of the stock markets, that they every 3 months they had to report their results, and then there's the whole casino of gambling on shares, whether they are long or short, and all the rest of it. And he said, you know, if we made it law for companies to only report annually, it would enable chief executives to take a longer term view. And interestingly, 6 months later, he was fired because the stock market had gone down. And it brought home to me that, you know, business people are often in a very difficult conundrum between trying to satisfy shareholders, but also taking a much longer term view. So again, we have to be strategic and persistent, work with good people on the business side, and there are many of them, and try and find a way through, and particularly to try and control the financialization of our whole economy. That companies that make things and organize things are basically doing a good thing. People gambling with money the whole time are not.